Hello everybody, welcome to module 4 in this course. I hope it was a great journey for you. In module 1 we talked about introduction to API. In module 2 we talked about authentication, attacks and defense. We talked about basic authentication, digest authentication and GWT. In module 3 we talked about authorizations and OAuth protocol, attacks and defense. In this module we will talk about other attacks targeting the API. We will talk about ddos attacks, brute force attacks, other attacks like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, IDOR, and also we will talk about how to target the development and the staging API bypass protection on the production API. So let's start with the first video of our first session. We will talk about aggressive attacks, the DDoS attack. DDoS attack is flooding the server with massive requests and massive amount of requests in order to get the server offline or make it too busy to respond to other requests from normal users. The hacker makes the request through botnets of PCs or IoT devices that make this massive amount of requests to the server to make it very busy to respond to other requests or take the server offline. There is too many types of DDoS attacks targeting layers on OSI model, but the most dangerous one is the layer 7 DOS attack, which the application layer, because it's very hard to detect this type of attacks and differentiate this request from the normal requests from normal users. Attacker target in best case unauthenticated endpoint, because it's will easy to request from multiple APIs, and it will easy to tell its botnet to target this URL without any complication with authentication and without any rate limit can be done in the code. So in best cases there is unauthenticated endpoint, and also this endpoint time or CPU consuming process has this process like for example input output IO writes on the disk, like file upload for example, or heavy database process like search URL or search API endpoint or autocomplete API endpoint. This type will be a time and CPU consuming process. So if the attacker hits this URL very hard, this more likely to be done successfully. And also attacker like to target the IP direct and bypass the domain and caching servers and load balancing if any. So he can target the IP for the server directly, so it can be more likely to success. What's the process of the hacker targeting your API or API endpoint? First, recon. He tries to get as information as he can from your API. As we learned from module 1, he will learn about how your API works, what the authentication in your API, what URL is required authentication and what URL is not required authentication. What type of web server you are using. Are you using Apache or using Nginx or other custom web server? Are you behind a cloud firewall or not? Are you using a caching server like Vagrant or something else? This all information he gathered, so he can find what URL he can target and what payload he can use to target you. So the second thing in the process is to find the weakest endpoint, find the weakest URL he can target. The best case, as we said before, that URL is time consuming, have a big CPU processing, and unauthenticated. The URL don't require any authentication, so this is the best case for him. And the third is prepare the botnet he will use. It's based on the size of the server and size of the website, so it can be a small botnet or medium botnet or huge botnet of PCs or IoT devices to participate in this attack. The second thing to do is the next thing to do is prepare the payload itself. Like we said before, if he targeting an API endpoint for search or autocomplete, so this is the URL he will be used, and the URL is requested with GET request and with the random characters for the query that the API will search for, so he can generate as many as he can a random string, so it can be hard to detect this attack and hard to block the request. And finally launch the attack against your server. We will not have any examples, any practical examples for DDoS attack. DDoS attack is strictly illegal across all countries. So the main purpose for this video is to learn how it works in general and how to mitigate this attack if you are the target. First, in mitigation, don't make any time and CPU consuming URL outside your authentication guide or authentication scope. And best practice is make your API, all your API behind authentication. It make it more controlled, so we can add rate limit policies and spike arrest policies and other mitigation for the API. If your URL exposed, you can't do this mitigation for rate limit or other things because of attacks done across 100 or 1,000 IPs. So it's very hard to block these IPs and apply a rate limit for the request. So make all URL inside the authentication. Second thing, limit time of requests and number of requests. This is what we talk about rate limit. You must limit the time of request and the number of requests per second per authenticated user. This will make it very strict and very powerful against the DDoS attacks. Use caching when possible. It's very powerful also. Load balance every endpoint in the API. Make it load balance across servers, so it can be flexible and add or delete server as it needed. And finally, don't allow direct IP access. You must use domain name to make it go through the normal process you are doing, caching or load balancing or other thing. Don't allow IP direct to any of your servers. Okay, this is what we have for DDoS attack. I hope any one of you don't be a victim for this attack. I hope you enjoy it. In the next video we'll talk about brute force attack. So see you next time. Thank you.